After an 11-day standoff between the presidential office and the National Assembly, an impeachment motion was passed by the parliament with over 200 lawmakers voting in favor of suspending the president from duty for his declaration of martial law. We have more on this development on Press Perspective today. Hope your work week is off to a good start. You're watching Press Perspective for this Monday, December 16th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. The Parliament voted in favour of impeaching the President this past Saturday for his declaration of martial law earlier this month. Now, that being said, President Yoon Suk Yeol's political fate now lies in the hands of the Constitutional Court. For more on this, I have Andrew Salmon with the Washington Times here in the studio. Andrew, welcome back.
Hello.
I also have Sebastien Falletti with French daily Figaro live on the line. Sebastien, it's good to have you with us.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
Right, Andrew, let's begin with the results of the impeachment vote at the Parliament this past Saturday. Were the results, would you say, largely within the expectations of the people here?
Yeah, I think they largely were, as you put it. Everyone I speak to thinks it was as likely that someone in South Korea in 2024 would institute martial law as Kim Jong-un would institute liberal democracy. So this was an extraordinary shock when it happened. And I think balance has been restored. So for the Korean people, they stood up for democracy. They did the right thing. No question, no problem. I think there's a much wider question which needs to be asked in greater depth in the months and years ahead, which is while the people may have a sound democratic sort of compass, what about the governance structure? In the last 5 administrations, we've had 3 impeachments, 2 presidents jailed, 1 ex-president commit suicide. There's something dubious about this. This is not normal. And we've got a very confrontational political culture, and we've got a bipartisan structure, unicameral National Assembly and a presidency. And instead of sort of checking and balancing them, they're just constantly doing this. It's a politics as war. So, I mean, my sense is that one thing Koreans might start talking about in the future to change this dynamic is perhaps adding a 3rd power structure, which logically speaking, will be an upper house in the National Assembly. Then you have a more diffused power, and it's no longer bipartisan. But that's a discussion for Koreans to have in the long term.
Right, once the political power vacuum here has been filled then. Sebastien, meanwhile, what has been the response to this latest result among the public here? What have you been hearing on the ground, Sebastien?
Well, I mean, on Yeouido last afternoon, of course, just right after the announcement of the successful vote on the impeachment, of course, there was a huge sense of relief on the ground among the people there, especially the 100,000 of people who gather around the National Assembly. There was even some people crying. There was some people just dancing, like there was this kind of sense of K-pop concert atmosphere. But I think the major sense I had from people talking there was about a sense of relief, but people feel there that the Korea is not out of the woods, that the crisis is still on. And we've heard also President Yoon very combative speech a couple of hours later. There's a long process ahead, and clearly people have a sense that the crisis opened by the martial law promulgation is still on, and we've seen also we are in a very polarized landscape, and these 2 sides are still fighting heavily. I mean, just right now around Gwanghwamun, there's still demonstration in the street of people. We're hearing people supporting President Yoon. We've seen around Yongsan presidential office this extraordinary sight of like flowers, funeral flowers, sent by the supporter of the impeachment. But we also seen like this pink bouquet of flower sent by supporter of the president, lining up all around the wall of the presidential office. So this country is still very much split. And even though Yoon's approval rate is extremely low at around 11% before the vote, there's still a sizable chunk of people in the conservative side who don't want to go through the same process they went through under Park Geun-hye. They don't want to give up everything. So I think we're opening a phase that where we'll see an impeachment process that is much more contentious than in 2017.
Right. And Andrew, could you walk us through the proceedings that are likely to take place ahead now that the Parliament has voted in support of impeaching the President?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're not in uncharted territory. This is the third presidential impeachment, so this path has been walked before. And the last two impeachments, one was overturned, one was upheld, so anything could feasibly happen. Basically, the Constitutional Court, once it begins sitting, has 180 days to make its decision. After that, if the impeachment is upheld, then we have, I think, 60 days before a new presidential election. That is a pretty clear roadmap forward. I think the one issue that may get in the way of that is right at the very, very beginning. The Constitutional Court has a 9-judge panel. Currently, it only has 6 justices occupying those seats. And Sebastien and I and other foreign correspondents were told last week by constitutional law experts that the court will almost certainly want to try this hugely high-profile case with a full complement of justices. So we expect to see the appointment via the National Assembly of 3 more judges in, I would guess, the days ahead.
Right. Sebastien, that being said, and keeping in mind what Andrew has said, how soon can we expect a snap election to fill the power vacuum here in the country?
Well, this is still a very open question. We are talking about a matter of months. If we are based on what happened under Park Geun-hye impeachment process, it took around 3 months to get an impeachment confirmed, and then we got election. The rules say that once the impeachment has been confirmed, an election, presidential election, needs to be organized within 60 days, like around 2 months. So at best, we could expect a presidential election around April or May, which leave us like still 6 months of kind of power vacuum. Of course, the former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo is now president by interim and is guiding the country, but he doesn't have the political legitimacy of an election, and 6 months is a long way to go. And as Andrew mentioned, this time there's far more challenges in the proceeding. First, because as he said, the Constitutional Court is not doesn't have a full number of judges, but we also have a political atmosphere that is much more entrenched. And we've seen on the conservative side that there is still people who are even though they criticize President Yoon's rash decision to impose martial law, they don't necessarily want to give the key of the country to the opposition. And I think here the memories of 2017 is still hanging heavily on the conservative side. Here, they remember that at that time they played by the rule. They felt that they had to, in the name of national unity, to give up on Park Geun-hye, but then they felt they got nothing out of it. And there's a lot of people in that side of the political landscape who feel this time we should be much more bold in protecting our value and our interest. So that opened the case for maybe a more complicated process. So April, May sounds like a possible target, but we can't exclude a delay. The court has 180 days to rule out, but even that term is actually just not fully mandatory. We can't exclude something longer, but probably the judge will want to speed it up in the name of the national crisis the country is facing.
Right. Andrew, do you suppose this political fallout here in the country would perhaps tip the scale in favor of an opposition party win in the case of a snap election? If that is the case, how would that affect Korea's foreign policy going forward?
Yeah, I think you're speaking very, very, very prudently there, Sunhee. I mean, it seems blatantly obvious to me that this terrible error, this colossal miscalculation that Yoon made has absolutely tipped the scale against his party. And this raises huge questions for Korean conservatism going forward. This will be their second consecutive president facing impeachment. How is it they're choosing these kinds of leaders? So we've got an issue with the right wing, and indeed the crisis has already kicked off. Today, Han Dong-hoon, the party leader, resigned, and that shows you there's carnage to come within the party, and that's not going to help them if we have a snap election any time in the next few months, which looks pretty likely. In terms of foreign policy, if the opposition DPK, Democratic Party of Korea, led by this very impressive sort of firebrand leader, Lee Jae-myung, if he manages to stay out of jail, because of course he faces a vast raft of legal challenges too, but if his Teflon continues to work and he does become president, we'll see, I think, almost an overturning of Yoon's foreign policy, which will mean a shift probably away from the US toward China, absolutely, definitely away from Japan, possibly back towards North Korea. So, you know, this is one of the issues with democracies. When parties change, policies change, and that affects foreign policy too.
Right. And Sebastien, this is an impromptu question. What are your thoughts about what are your thoughts, that is, about the future of Korea's foreign policy in the case of a democratic win of the snap election?
Well, it's of course still very early, but as Andrew mentioned, we know that Lee Jae-myung and the Min Sunhee have been consistently saying that Korea should have a far more balanced approach to foreign policy, criticizing the alignment with the US that has been advocated by President Yoon. And clearly here, the idea is that you should talk more to China, you should also reopen dialogue with North Korea. So these are the traditional policies of the Democratic Party, and that would be a major shift from what President Yoon has been doing, because President Yoon has been really trying to work as closely as possible with the US. But of course, there's a bigger question mark here. There's another game changer, which is the return of Donald Trump to the White House. We know that Donald Trump has a very different approach, has showed a very different approach to the Korean Peninsula in his first mandate. He has been meeting the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un during summits, and he's also had contentious negotiation with Seoul when it comes to defense cost sharing, and all this is probably going to come back into the picture because based on what we've heard from the candidate Trump. So this is an additional layer, and of course the question how South Korea is going to adjust to this new environment is essential. But for that, we also need to wait to see what actually President Trump has in store once he's inaugurated as president later in January.
Right, and speaking about Mr. Trump's upcoming North Korea policy, Andrew, there have been a few rumblings, if you will, about the possibility of a second Trump administration perhaps accepting a nuclear-powered North Korea. What are your thoughts about that possibility?
Yeah, I mean, this, on the one hand, would be, I think, just accepting the very, very obvious reality that North Korea is de facto a nuclear state. The question is, do you accept it de jure? And that's a very hard sell to the American public. If an American president says we have to accept this reality. Previously, pretty much all negotiations between Washington and Pyongyang have been somehow predicated on this idea of eventual denuclearization. If that's taken off the table, we're in completely uncharted territory. I think one potential ramification of that position, if Trump does indeed take that position, would be South Korea would have to very, very seriously start thinking about its own potential nuclear deterrent. And again, we don't know where Mr. Trump would stand on that. Who knows? He's in favor of allies up-arming, up-spending. Perhaps he would go along with that. perhaps in return for moving some troops out of South Korea. But this is all up in the air. I think these discussions, if they do happen, are potentially game-changing both for North Korea and South Korea.
Right. In the meantime, back on the political front, back on the local political front, that is, Sebastien, earlier last Thursday, this is something you touched upon earlier last Thursday, the president vowed to challenge all legal cases, President Yoon Suk Yeol, that is. He denied any wrongdoing. On Saturday night, following the parliament's vote again, he spoke about not stepping down, but stepping aside for the time being to deal with the legal proceedings against him. That being said, Sebastien, what appear to be some of the broader takeaways from the president's remarks as of late?
Well, clearly the attitude is defiant. He had already said that just before on December 12 during a surprise TV appearance. He's basically challenging and he's ready to fight till the end, as he said. And this is really significant because it's quite a different take from what we've seen under the case of Park Geun-hye when she was impeached. Of course, she tried to fight in court. She was trying to defend herself, but we didn't have the same. We're not seeing here the same level of fighting spirit. Clearly, the president is adamant. He's now saying that the imposition of martial law was the right decision, and he wants to make his case until the last stand. And this opened the gate for, again, a much more complicated process. And of course, there are here the calculation of the conservative side. As Andrew mentioned, we know that on the opposition, President the Minjudong leader, Lee Jae-myung, is facing some critical judgment from the court in the coming months. By spring, and there could be a temptation to try to play with time on the conservative side, try to slow down as much the process to make sure that he's potentially out of the presidential race. So there's a lot of tactical calculation that could play in the conservative side, and of course President Yoon, being combative in that regard, could also still appeal to some of the voters. I mean, even if they will agree that impeachment was necessary, they don't want to condemn him completely because they will say there is a point. We cannot give all the power to the opposition in this case.
Right, and staying with the president's defense of his decision to declare martial law, Andrew, he claims that the imposition of martial law was an act of governance and not rebellion. Now, his words have fueled quite a bit of a debate within the ruling political party. How do you explain this divide within the party, the ruling party, that is?
Yeah, well, I think, well, to the best of my knowledge, it is the privilege of the president to, in cases of a national emergency or a national security emergency, to declare martial law. So, per se, that's not unconstitutional. But there's a whole range of steps you're supposed to take, one of which is notifying the National Assembly, not sending commandos into the Assembly to drag people out so they can't form a quorum and vote down the state of martial law, which of course is exactly what happened. So what he says, and he was a state prosecutor his entire career. He's no fool. He's graduated from Seoul National University Law School, which is the Oxbridge or the Harvard of Korea. I think he has some idea of what he's talking about. Nevertheless, huge questions about not the act as much as the way he carried out the act, the execution. Moving forward, I mean, I think the PPP, the People Power Party, like every party, has factions within it who support various different leaders. This is a normal part of any democratic government, democratic system rather. In Japan, these factions even have names. So clearly, only 12 out of, I think, 108 lawmakers in the party voted for impeachment. So there's a lot of people who believe that it is their constitutional, or rather their democratic right to represent their constituents who perhaps do support, who clearly did support Yoon and possibly even supported his martial law declaration. But my guess, looking ahead, is that the PPP is going to be tearing itself to pieces in the next few months, and that's going to be very problematic for Han Duck-soo, the Prime Minister who's leading the caretaker government and who's got to represent Korea not just nationally but on the international stage at a time when we've got a power transition in Washington, which is the most important ally for South Korea. So there's a lot of challenges both for the party and for the ministers, the cabinet members in Han's caretaker government going forward. So I sort of agree with Sebastien. This crisis, the immediate crisis has passed. We've now got a roadmap forward, but we still are in a political crisis in the sense that we need a firm hand at the national helm, and it's impossible for Han Duck-soo to be that firm hand.
Right. Andrew, the Constitutional Court took, and I believe 63 days to come up with its ruling on the case, on the impeachment case against former President Roh Moo-hyun back in 2004. Okay. It took 91 days to come up with its decision for former President Park Geun-hye. Some are saying that its decision for President Yoon Suk Yeol may come out within those times, either 63 days or 91 days. That being said, do you suppose chances are high for the Constitutional Court to perhaps uphold the decision by the Parliament?
I mean, that's in the hands of the Constitutional Court. I'm not a betting man. If you held my hand to the fire and forced me to make a decision, I would say, looking at it comparatively, imposition of martial law, deployment of special forces to prevent a vote taking place, apparently the preparation of a detention camp for politicians and some journalists. This is far, far more egregious than anything Park Geun-hye ever did. So my guess, my sense, and I'm terrible at predicting things, is that they may well uphold the impeachment, yeah.
Right, of course. And Andrew, this of course is just your guess, as you clarified earlier.
Yes.
Right. Sebastien, meanwhile, what are some of the upcoming events on the local political front this week to keep an eye on?
Well, of course, the key thing is the proceedings of the start, the really kick off of the trial of President Yoon by the Constitutional Court. I mean, and this is now been just announced to be scheduled on the December 27. The court will have a first hearing on this case. So that will officially kickstart that long process you mentioned just. So that will bring a lot of attention. The president himself is supposed to attend, but it's not compulsory for him to attend. So that will be a first indication whether he faces the court, or whether he decides to abstain and even to stay out of the limelight in a signs of defiance. That would be a first signal of his strategy. But of course, meanwhile, we've just seen today, like as Andrew mentioned, the An Dong-hoon, the president of the PPP, resigning. We can expect a kind of a domino effect in the coming days all around the political landscape of Korea. This is a kind of political earthquake where we are going through, and there will be ramification in every corner of Korean political establishment. And we can imagine that all the players are now recalibrating their strategy for the coming months, and of course, for that upcoming election that is going to be already decisive for the future of Korea for the next 5 years. So I think the coming days is going to be a lot of also consultation, recalibration for the next chapter on the peninsula.
Right, much to look forward to then. All right, Sebastien, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today.
Thank you very much.
And here in the studio, and Andrew, thank you so much for graciously taking my impromptu questions as well.
Thank you.
Right, that is all the time we have for this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.